The old man lay bleeding in the dust, and 50 people stepped around him like he was a stone. Thomas Wade saw the crowd first too many bodies gathered for a normal Saturday. He guided his horse toward the mercantile, expecting a sale or a preacher. Instead, he found silence, the kind that settles over good people doing bad things. Then he saw the boots, worn cavalry boots, soles cracked from 1,000 miles. The man wearing them lay near the porch steps, face turned toward the sun, blood darkening the dirt beneath his shoulder. Thomas dismounted. His boots hit the ground hard. What happened here? The storekeeper wiped his hands on his apron. Don't know. Showed up an hour ago. Probably drunk. Drunk men don't bleed like that. Well, he ain't our problem. Thomas pushed through the crowd. Women turned away. Men studied their boots. A child tugged her mother's sleeve. Asking to help? The mother pulled her along without a word. Thomas knelt. The man's face was weathered. Deep lines carved by wind and sun. Blood-matted silver hair. His breathing came shallow and slow. Then Thomas saw the eyes, even half-closed, even fading. Those eyes sparked something deep in Thomas's chest. A memory 15 years old, buried under cattle prices and drought worries and the comfortable weight of survival. God Almighty, Thomas whispered. I know him. He leaned closer. The man's coat had fallen open. Pinned to the inside pocket was a tarnished cavalry medal. The ribbon sun-faded to pale blue. Thomas's hand moved to his own chest, fingers brushing the locket under his shirt. Mary's locket, the one she gave him the day after the rescue. The storekeeper called from the porch. Thomas, don't make trouble. He's probably been discharged. Not worth your time. Thomas didn't look up. His throat felt tight. He's worth more than this whole street. The old man stirred. His lips moved, forming words Thomas could barely hear. Just let me rest here, son. That voice, rough as gravel, but steady underneath. A commander's voice. Even now. Thomas's hands shook. Not from weakness, from rage. Thomas slid his arms under the old man's shoulders and knees. The man groaned but didn't fight. Easy, Captain, Thomas said quietly. I've got you. The man's eyes opened halfway. Confusion clouded them. Don't. Know you. But I know you, Captain, and I owe you. Thomas lifted him. The old man weighed less than he should have, bones sharp through worn clothes. Thomas carried him toward his horse. The banker stepped forward, blocking the path. Thomas, think about this. You'll embarrass yourself. Step aside. Whitmore. He's clearly been discharged. There are reasons the Army lets men go. Thomas stopped. He looked at the banker, then at the crowd. Faces he'd known for 20 years. Neighbors. Friends. He'd thought, this man saved my wife, Thomas said. His voice carried across the street. 15 years ago, when Comanche raiders burned the settler wagons south of here, this man, Captain Samuel Garrett, rode through hell to get her out. A woman in the crowd gasped softly. Others shifted. Uncomfortable. The storekeeper tried again. That was a long time ago. Thomas. People change. Yeah, Thomas said. They do. He lifted Samuel onto his horse, steadying him against the saddle. Samuel slumped forward, barely conscious. Thomas swung up behind him. One arm locked around the captain's chest. I'm taking him to my ranch. He'll stay there until he's well, if any of you have a problem with that. You know where to find me. No one spoke. Thomas turned his horse. As they rode down the street, he heard the crowd breaking apart. Footsteps scattering like leaves. A child's voice rose, Mama, why didn't we help? But the mother hushed her quick. Thomas felt Samuel sag against him. The old man's head rolled back, eyes closed. Stay with me, Captain, Thomas said. Just a few more miles. behind them. The blood stain on the street began to darken in the sun. Dust drifted over it, covering what the town wanted to forget. Thomas pressed his heels to the horse. The ranch couldn't come fast enough. 15 years, he thought. 15 years I've owed this man everything. And I almost walked past him, too. The thought sat in his stomach like a stone. Mary saw the old man's face and dropped the kettle. Water splashed across the kitchen floor, but she didn't notice. She was already moving, rushing toward the door as Thomas guided his horse to the porch. "Thomas, is that... It's him." Her hand covered her mouth. Tears came fast, silent. She reached up to help Thomas lower Samuel from the saddle. "Careful," Thomas said. "He's hurt bad." Together they carried him inside, through the warm kitchen, into the guest room at the back of the house. Mary stripped the quilt back while Thomas eased Samuel onto the bed. Samuel's eyes flickered open. He looked at Mary, confused. "Ma'am, I don't want to trouble you." "Hush," Mary said. Her voice broke. "You're no trouble." She brought water, clean cloth, salve, while Thomas held the lamp. Mary cleaned the wound on Samuel's shoulder, a gash. Deep, but not fatal. Someone had struck him, maybe with a bottle or a board. The bleeding had mostly stopped. Thomas watched his wife work. Her hands were steady, but her face was wet with tears. "He doesn't remember us," Thomas said quietly. "He will." Mary pressed cloth to the wound, gentle but firm. "Give him time." Samuel's breathing evened out. The tension left his jaw. Sleep took him under. The kind of sleep that only comes when the body knows it's finally safe. Mary sat back, wiping her hands. She looked at Thomas. "Do you remember what I told you?" she asked. "About that day. You said he saved you." "I said he saved everyone. But I didn't tell you the whole story." Thomas pulled a chair close. "Tell me now." Mary took a breath. Her eyes went distant, seeing past the walls, past the years. "There were 30 of us in those wagons. Families, children. The Comanche came fast 20, maybe 30 warriors. We had 4 rifles between us." She paused, fingers twisting the cloth in her lap. Captain Garrett's company was 2 miles north. He saw the smoke. His sergeant told him to ride for the fort, get reinforcements. That was the smart move. The safe move. But he didn't? No. He charged, brought 8 men straight into the fight. They were outnumbered 3-1. Her voice dropped. He lost 12 soldiers that day. Thomas, 12. Because he chose us over orders. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. The army blamed him. Mary continued. Said he acted recklessly. They buried the report. Buried the commendations. He was reassigned to frontier posts. Forgotten. She looked at Samuel, sleeping now. His face peaceful for the first time in who knew how long. "We owe him everything," Mary said. "Our daughter, our life, everything." Thomas stood. He walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "He stays," Thomas said. "Until he's well, until he's whole. I don't care what the town says." Mary rose and stood beside him. She slipped her hand into his. "Even if it costs us?" she asked quietly. Thomas looked at her, at the woman who'd lived because a stranger chose courage over caution. Even then, outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Thomas watched the road, knowing what would come. The town wouldn't let this go quietly. But for the first time in 15 years, the debt he carried felt lighter. He was finally paying it back. They came with smiles, but Thomas saw the daggers underneath. 3 days had passed. Samuel was stronger now, able to sit up and take broth. Color had returned to his face, but the bruises remained, dark reminders of what the town had allowed. Thomas heard the horses before he saw them. 3 riders, moving slow up the ranch road. He recognized them immediately. Whitmore, the banker, Hayes, the merchant, Pritchard, the lawyer. Men who measured everything in profit and reputation. He met them at the fence. Didn't invite them closer. "Gentlemen," Thomas said. His tone made the words sound like an accusation. Whitmore dismounted, hat in hand, the picture of concern. "Thomas, we need to talk. As friends. Friends don't leave men bleeding in the street." Hayes cleared his throat. "We understand you're upset, but you need to hear the truth about Captain Garrett." "I know the truth." "Do you?" Pritchard leaned forward in his saddle. "Did you know he was discharged, that the Army released him for cause?" Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "Where'd you hear that?" "It's common knowledge. The man's record is questionable at best." "Questionable." Thomas let the word hang. "That what you call saving 30 settlers from Comanche raiders?" Whitmore raised a hand. Placating. "We're not disputing what happened 15 years ago, but things change. Men change. The Army doesn't discharge decorated officers without reason. Show me the discharge papers." Silence. "That's what I thought," Thomas said. He turned toward the house, then stopped. Mary stood on the porch, arms crossed. In her hand was a yellowed piece of paper, Samuel's commendation letter, the one he'd carried in his coat pocket. Folded and refolded so many times the creases had nearly torn through. Thomas took it from her and handed it to Whitmore. "Read it." Whitmore unfolded the letter carefully. His eyes scanned the text. His face tightened. "For extraordinary valor in defense of civilian settlers. Personal disregard for safety. 12 men lost under his command." Whitmore's voice faded. 12 men, Thomas said quietly. Men with families. Men who followed his orders into a fight they knew they couldn't win. And he led them anyway, because it was right. Hayes shifted in his saddle. "Thomas, we're thinking of your family. Winter's coming. Feed contracts need to be settled." There it was. The real reason for the visit. "Are you threatening me?" Thomas asked. "We're reminding you," Pritchard said. "That business depends on trust. Community trust." Thomas looked at each man in turn. He thought about Samuel, sleeping in the guest room. About Mary, who'd survived because a stranger chose duty over safety. About the town that had watched a hero bleed and done nothing. "Then I'll buy feed elsewhere," Thomas said. "But he stays." Whitmore's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake." "No, I'm fixing one." The 3 men exchanged glances. Whitmore folded the letter and handed it back. "You have a week to reconsider," he said. "After that, well, business is business." They turned their horses and rode away slow, making sure Thomas understood the weight of their departure. Mary came down from the porch. She stood beside Thomas, watching the dust settle behind the riders. "They'll make trouble," she said. "I know. We might lose contracts, maybe more." Thomas looked at her. "Would you have me send him away?" Mary's eyes were fierce. "Never." Thomas nodded. He looked back at the house, at the window where Samuel rested. A crow landed on the fence post nearby. Black against the gray sky. It cawed once, harsh and sharp, then flew away. Thomas felt the weight of what was coming, but he also felt something else, something he hadn't felt in years. He felt clean. Samuel stared into the fire like a man searching for ghosts. A week had passed since the delegation's visit. Thomas had spent the days working fence repairs, wood cutting. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind off the silence from town. No one had come to trade. No one had visited. The isolation pressed in like winter cold. But tonight, Samuel was strong enough to sit by the hearth. Thomas poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to the old soldier. Samuel took it with a nod of thanks. For a while, neither man spoke. The fire crackled. Wind rattled the windows. Your wife is a good woman, Samuel said finally. The best. You're lucky. Thomas heard something beneath the words. Not envy. Grief. Captain, Thomas said carefully. What brought you to Timber Ridge? Samuel took a long drink. He set the glass down and stared at his weathered hands. I was looking for my son. Thomas waited. I had a family once, Samuel continued. His voice was steady, but the words came slow, like pulling splinters. A wife? A boy? I thought I was serving them. Serving something bigger. Thought my duty mattered. He paused. The fire popped. My wife died of fever while I was out on patrol, year after Little Bighorn. My boy Jacob, he was 8. Relatives took him in. I sent money when I could. Wrote letters. Samuel's jaw tightened. He stopped answering when he turned 16. Yo, how long since you've seen him? 20 years. Thomas felt the weight of that number. 2 decades. A lifetime. I heard he became a marshal, Samuel said. Somewhere up in Wyoming Territory. Good man, from what I'm told. Honest, tough. A bitter smile crossed his face. Everything I tried to be. Then why won't he see you? Samuel looked at Thomas. In the firelight. His eyes were ancient. Because I chose strangers over him. Because I saved your wife and let mine die alone. Because I was a better soldier than I was a father. The words hung in the air. Thomas didn't know what to say. What could be said? Mary appeared in the doorway. Quiet as always. She carried Samuel's old cavalry coat, the one he'd been wearing when Thomas found him. She'd spent days cleaning it, mending the tears, polishing the tarnished metal. She handed it to Samuel. You'll need this when you find him. Samuel took the coat. His hands trembled. He stared at the metal, freshly shined, catching the firelight. Thank you, ma'am, but I don't think he wants to be found. Not by me. Then you make him want to. Mary said simply. She touched Samuel's shoulder. You're still his father. After she left. Thomas poured more whiskey. They sat in silence. 2 men carrying different weights of the same burden duty and its cost. I should have looked for you, Thomas said. After you saved Mary. Should have found you. Thanked you proper. Samuel shook his head. You don't owe me gratitude. You owe your wife a good life. That's payment enough. It's not. Samuel met his eyes. For a moment. The old soldier's mask cracked, and Thomas saw the man beneath tired, lonely, still hoping for something he'd given up expecting. You gave me a bed when the world gave me dirt, Samuel said quietly. You stood up to your town for me. That's more than I've had in 20 years. Thomas raised his glass. To second chances. Then, Samuel raised his, to men who take them. They drank. Outside, the first snow began to fall, soft and silent. Winter was coming, and with it, the weight of choices not yet made. Thomas knew trouble by the sound of too many horses. He was in the barn, forking hay, when he heard them. 5 riders, moving in formation up the ranch road. He set the pitchfork aside and walked out into the cold morning. The town council had come in force. Whitmore led them, flanked by Hayes, Pritchard, and 2 others, Reverend Alcott and the territorial land assessor. Official business. Then, Thomas crossed his arms and waited. Whitmore dismounted first. He didn't smile this time. Thomas, we need to settle this. Nothing to settle. Your feed contracts are void. No merchant in Timber Ridge will trade with you until you comply with community standards. Community standards, Thomas repeated. That what you call abandoning a wounded man. Hayes spoke up, voice sharp. This isn't about one man. It's about order, responsibility. You're making yourself a pariah over someone who saved my wife's life. Thomas finished. Say it plain, Hayes, or don't say it at all. Reverend Alcott stepped forward. Thomas had known the man for 10 years, respected him. The Reverend's presence here felt like a betrayal. Thomas, Alcott said gently, I understand your gratitude, but Captain Garrett would be better served at the Territorial Charity Home in Bozeman. They have resources. Medical care. It's the practical choice. Practical. Thomas tasted the word like ash. When did you start preaching practical over right? Alcott's face tightened. I'm trying to help you keep your ranch. By sending away the man I owe everything to. By being realistic. Thomas looked at each man in turn. He saw calculation in Whitmore's eyes, irritation in Hayes's, discomfort in the assessor's, and in the Reverend's shame, hidden under layers of justification. From the house. A door opened. Samuel appeared on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. He said nothing. Just watched. His face showed no surprise. He'd seen this before. Thomas realized. Had probably lived this scene 100 times in 100 towns. Samuel's eyes met Thomas's across the yard. In that look, Thomas saw resignation. The old soldier was already packing in his mind, already preparing to leave. You have 1 week, Whitmore said. After that, we'll assume you've made your choice. The council turned to leave. As they mounted up, Thomas's daughter appeared in the doorway beside Samuel. She was 6 years old, small and bright-eyed. She took Samuel's hand and looked at her father. Papa, she called out, is Captain Sam leaving? Thomas opened his mouth. No words came. The council rode away, slow and deliberate. Dust rose behind them. Crows circled overhead, black shapes against the gray sky. Mary appeared on the porch. She didn't speak, just gathered their daughter in her arms. She looked at Thomas, and in her eyes he saw a question she wouldn't ask aloud. What will you do? Thomas watched the council disappear down the road. He felt the walls closing in winter coming. Contracts gone. The town united against him. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd earned. Balanced against a debt 15 years old. Inside the barn. His father's old rifle hung on the wall. Thomas could see it from where he stood. Not for hunting, for weight, for remembering what men were supposed to be. He turned back to the porch. Samuel had already gone inside. Packing. Probably. Thomas stood in the yard alone, between the road and his home, trying to find the courage to choose. Thomas sat in the barn with his father's rifle across his knees, not for defense, just for weight. Night had fallen. Snow drifted against the barn walls, soft and relentless. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm. Thomas could see Mary moving past the window, putting their daughter to bed. Normal life, continuing despite everything. He'd been sitting here for an hour, maybe more. Time felt strange. The council's ultimatum echoed in his head. 1 week. 1 week to choose between a debt and a future, between honor and survival. Thomas closed his eyes. He saw Mary 15 years ago, stomach swollen with pregnancy, face streaked with soot and tears. Saw the burning wagon, the Comanche warriors closing in. Saw his own face if Samuel hadn't charged, if Mary had died, if their daughter had never been born. That version of himself was a ghost, a man who'd never learned to laugh at breakfast, never felt small arms around his neck, never knew the weight of being loved without condition. Samuel had given him that, had given him everything, and Thomas had almost walked past him in the street. The thought made him sick. He opened the locket around his neck. Mary's face smiled up from the small photograph, young and hopeful. On the back, the inscription she'd added the day after the rescue. By grace we lived. Grace. Not luck. Not chance. Grace, the unearned gift. The debt that could never be repaid. Thomas heard footsteps. Mary entered the barn, a shawl wrapped tight against the cold. She didn't say anything, just stood there, letting him feel her presence. Finally, she moved. She set something on the workbench beside him, a piece of paper, their daughter's drawing, done in crayon that afternoon, 2 stick figures with hats, both holding rifles. Underneath, in careful letters, Captain Sam and Papa. Thomas picked it up. The drawing was clumsy, beautiful, true, in his daughter's eyes. He and Samuel were the same protectors, heroes, men who stood against the dark. What would she think, he wondered. If he sent Samuel away, what lesson would that teach her about debts and honor and the things worth? Keeping Mary finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but fierce. I married a man who does what's right. Don't become someone else now. Thomas looked at her. What if I lose everything? Then we'll have less, but we'll still have us. And we'll know we stood by someone who stood by strangers when it mattered. Thomas set the rifle aside. He stood and pulled his wife close. She felt solid, real, more valuable than any contract or reputation. I'm building him a cabin, Thomas said. On the east pasture. He's staying. I don't care what it costs. Mary nodded against his chest. I know. And tomorrow, I'm telling the town why. Whether they listen or not, they'll listen. Mary pulled back, her eyes fierce. And some of them will remember what it means to be human. Thomas walked to the barn door. Snow fell thick now, covering the land in white. He grabbed his axe from the wall and a lantern from the hook. Mary watched him. Where are you going to eat? To cut timber. No sense waiting for daylight. He stepped into the snow. The cold bit at his face, but he barely felt it. He moved toward the tree line, lantern swinging, axe heavy in his hand. Inside the house, Samuel stood at the window. He watched Thomas mark the first tree, watched the axe rise and fall. The old soldier's face was unreadable, but his shoulders shook. He bowed his head. Silent tears fell. Outside, the first tree crashed down into the snow. Thomas marked another, then another. By morning, he'd have a dozen trees felled, ready for shaping. By morning, he'd have his answer ready for the town. Some debts, he thought, are paid in timber and sweat. And the courage to remember when the world wants to forget. Thomas didn't knock. He walked straight to the front of the congregation and turned to face them. Sunday morning, the church was full, every pew packed, every family present. Word had spread that Thomas Wade was coming, and the town gathered like spectators at a trial. Some came out of curiosity. Others came hoping to see him break. Thomas stood before them in his work clothes, hat in hand. Behind him, the Reverend sat silent in his chair, hands folded. Whitmore and Hayes watched from the front row, faces carved from stone. Mary entered through the side door, leading their daughter by the hand, and beside them Samuel, dressed in his cleaned cavalry uniform, the medal pinned above his heart. He walked straight back despite the stiffness in his shoulder, eyes forward. The congregation stirred. Whispers rippled through the pews. Thomas waited until they settled. Then he spoke. I'm not here to preach, he said. His voice carried, steady and clear. I'm here to tell you what happened 15 years ago, and what happened 3 weeks ago, and what's going to happen tomorrow. He looked at Whitmore. You asked me to be realistic, to think about my business, my future. You're right to worry. I've thought about it plenty. Thomas turned to the congregation. 15 years ago, my wife was 8 months pregnant. She was in a settler wagon train moving north. Comanche raiders hit them at dawn, 30 warriors, maybe more. 4 rifles to defend 30 people. He paused. Let them imagine it. Captain Samuel Garrett's company was 2 miles away. He saw the smoke. His orders were to ride for the fort and get reinforcements. That would have been smart, safe, by the book. Thomas's voice hardened. But my wife would have died. My daughter would have never been born. 30 people would have been slaughtered while soldiers rode the other direction. Silence. Absolute silence. Captain Garrett charged. Thomas continued. 8 men against 30. He lost 12 soldiers that day. 12 men with families, with futures, because he chose duty over safety, because he chose strangers over orders. He gestured to Samuel. This man saved everything I have. And 3 weeks ago, I almost walked past him bleeding in the street, just like you did. Shame flickered across faces. Some looked away. Others met his gaze, uncertain. The army buried his commendation, Thomas said, called him reckless, reassigned him to nowhere posts and forgot about him. And when he finally came here, old and hurt and alone, we finished what the army started. We erased him. Thomas's voice dropped, became a weapon. Judge him fine, but judge me first. Judge every man here who walked past him. Judge every woman who pulled her child away from helping. We all did it, every single one of us. Reverend Alcott stood slowly. His face was pale, stricken. Thomas, Reverend, you told me to be practical. You told me to send him away. Thomas looked at the congregation. This man preached about the Good Samaritan last month. Remember about not passing by on the other side of the road? Alcott's voice broke. I walked past him. The words came out raw, torn. God forgive me. I walked past him in the street. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Then a woman in the third row stood. The schoolteacher, Mrs. Henley. I did too, she said quietly. I told myself someone else would help. Another man rose, then another. One by one, people stood and spoke the words they'd been avoiding. I walked past. I saw him. I did nothing. Samuel raised his hand. The confession stopped. I didn't come here for guilt, Samuel said. His voice carried the weight of command. Even now. I came looking for my son. Didn't find him. But I found something else people brave enough to tell the truth. He looked at Thomas. That's more than most towns give. The banker's son stood suddenly. Young, maybe 25. He wore a faded army jacket, sleeves marked with corporal stripes. I'll donate timber, he said. His voice shook but held firm. For Captain Garrett's cabin, and I'll help build it. The young man looked at his father. Whitmore stared back, face hard. The son didn't sit down. Who else? The young man asked. Mrs. Henley raised her hand, then the blacksmith, then a farmer Thomas barely knew. Hands rose slowly at first, then faster. Whitmore stood and walked out. Hayes followed, a few others left with them. But not many. Not enough to matter. Reverend Alcott stepped forward. He looked at Samuel, then at Thomas. We'll start tomorrow, the Reverend said, at dawn. By the time the snow melted, the cabin stood, and the town had a story to tell their grandchildren. Spring came slow that year. The winter had been hard, the coldest in memory. But when the thaw finally arrived, it brought wildflowers bright yellow and purple, pushing up through last year's dead grass. Samuel's cabin sat on the east pasture, simple and sturdy. One room, a stone hearth, windows facing the sunrise. Above the door, Thomas had carved the captain's name and rank, not hidden, honored. The building had taken 2 months. 40 townspeople came to help at various times, some for a day, some for weeks. They worked in shifts, cutting timber, raising walls, laying the roof. The banker and merchant never showed, but their absence mattered less as the work went on. Samuel supervised from a chair someone brought, offering advice about joinery and roof pitch. His shoulder had healed, though it still ached in cold weather. His face had filled out. He smiled more. Thomas's daughter visited every afternoon, bringing drawings and questions. Samuel taught her to whittle, his old hands guiding her small ones. She made a lopsided horse. He told her it was perfect. on the day they finished the cabin. A rider came up the ranch road. Thomas saw him from a distance, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a marshal's star. Samuel was sitting on his new porch, testing the rocking chair the blacksmith had made. He looked up at the approaching rider and went very still. The marshal dismounted. He was maybe 40. With Samuel's eyes and Samuel's jaw, he stood at the edge of the porch, hat in hand. "Captain Garrett." His voice was formal, careful. Samuel stood slowly. "Jacob." Neither man moved. The distance between them felt vast. "I got a letter," Jacob said, "from a rancher named Wade. He told me what happened, what you did, 15 years back, what this town did 3 weeks ago." Samuel nodded, didn't speak. "He also told me," Jacob continued, voice rougher now, "that you've been looking for me for 20 years. "I have." "Why didn't you come sooner?" Samuel's face worked. He looked away, toward the mountains. "Because I thought you'd be better off without me. Because I was a coward." Jacob stood silent. Then he stepped onto the porch. He looked at the cabin, at the carved name above the door, at the wildflowers growing near the foundation. "You built this?" Jacob asked. "They built it for me." Jacob looked at his father. Really looked, seeing past the uniform and the years to the man underneath. "I was angry," Jacob said quietly. "For a long time. Thought you chose strangers over Ma, over me." "I did," Samuel said simply, "and I'm sorry." "But you kept choosing strangers. Didn't you kept helping people who needed it? Even when it cost you everything?" Samuel didn't answer. Jacob's throat worked. "That's what marshals do too. Guess I learned something from you after all." Samuel's eyes filled. He reached out, uncertain. Jacob stepped forward and embraced him. Thomas watched from his own porch, Mary beside him. Their daughter sat between them, leaning against her mother. They'd given the father and son space, but Thomas had wanted to see this moment. Mary slipped her hand into his. "You did that." "We did that," Thomas corrected. "The whole town did. Because you stood first." Thomas didn't answer. He thought about the old man bleeding in the street, about the choice he'd almost failed to make, about the debt he'd spent 15 years ignoring. Some things, he'd learned, couldn't be paid back, only forward. Samuel and Jacob sat on the porch steps, talking quietly. The words didn't carry, but the tone did, halting at first, then easier. Wounds healing in real time. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky gold and pink. Smoke rose from Samuel's new chimney. The cabin looked settled, permanent, like it had always been there. Thomas's daughter tugged his sleeve. "Papa, will Captain Sam stay forever?" Samuel heard the question. He looked across the pasture and smiled. "As long as your papa will have me," he called back. Thomas raised his voice. "Forever." Then Mary squeezed his hand. Their daughter smiled and went back to her drawing another picture of Captain Sam, this time standing in front of his cabin, flowers at his feet. Thomas looked at the scene before him, the cabin, the father and son, the spring flowers pushing through winter's death. He thought about honor and debt, and the small choices that change everything. He thought about the town, most of whom had learned what it cost to look away, and what it meant to look back. Some debts can't be paid in gold, he thought, but they can be paid in timber, sweat, and the courage to remember. Out here, that's all the currency worth having. The stars came out one by one, the fires burned warm, and the valley held them all, the living and the debt repaid.